It was the second week of October, and I had taken a few days off work to clear my head. Things had been stressful lately. Deadlines piling up, constant phone calls, and barely any time to just breathe. I wanted to get away from all of it, so I packed my backpack, filled it with enough food, water, and camping gear, and drove out to the Smoky Mountains. I had hiked a lot of local trails, but this time I wanted something different. I found a less popular trail online that looked remote and challenging. Exactly what I needed. I started my hike from a gravel lot that had just 2 other cars parked. The trail wasn't marked clearly, but I had downloaded an offline GPS map on my phone and had a printed version in my pocket just in case. The weather was cool and cloudy, perfect for hiking. The trail started easy, mostly flat with a few gentle climbs, and the forest was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot or birds high up in the trees. The first few hours went by smoothly. The trail narrowed and started to climb steeply around noon. I stopped a few times to catch my breath, drink water, and check my location. My plan was to make it to a clearing marked on the map by late afternoon and set up camp there for the night. It was supposed to be a small meadow surrounded by trees, with a stream running nearby. I reached the meadow around 4 p.m. It was beautiful. The clearing was flat and covered in dry grass, and the trees around it looked tall and healthy. I could hear the stream not far off. I set up my tent quickly, gathered some dry branches and twigs for a fire, and made myself a simple dinner. Just rice and beans I had brought in a Ziploc bag. As the sun dropped lower, the forest started to feel colder. I put on a thicker jacket and sat near the fire, warming my hands. By 7:30 p.m., it was dark. I lay inside the tent and read a few pages of a book before I started feeling tired. The sounds of the forest at night didn't bother me. Crickets, rustling leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. I eventually drifted off to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. I lay still, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. Felt wrong. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam lit up the inside of the tent and the thick nylon glowed faintly with shapes of trees outside. I didn't hear anything, but I felt uneasy. I listened harder and thought I heard faint crunching in the distance, like footsteps. Not fast or slow, just steady. I told myself it could be a deer or some animal, but the steps didn't wander or stop. They moved with direction, like someone walking deliberately. I stayed still for a long time, listening. The footsteps faded eventually, and I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sun was just rising, and the sky was painted with orange and gray. I stepped outside and walked around the clearing. There were no tracks. The grass was undisturbed. I checked the stream and filled my water bottle. I tried to shake off the unease. I packed up my gear and continued the trail. It climbed higher into the mountains and the trees grew denser. By noon, clouds rolled in and the wind picked up. The temperature dropped and I had to put on gloves and a hat. The trail twisted through thick brush and overgrown paths, and I had to duck under fallen logs and climb over rocks. I stopped once to eat, sitting on a flat rock that overlooked a steep slope. Later that afternoon, I realized something was wrong. The trail wasn't matching the map. According to the GPS, I had gone too far east. I checked my compass, and sure enough, I was off track. I tried to cut west through the woods to rejoin the trail, but the terrain was rough. Thick underbrush slowed me down, and I had to keep checking the map and compass every few minutes. After 2 hours of struggling, I found a narrow path that looked like it had been used recently. It wasn't on my map, but it was heading in the right direction. I followed it, hoping it would connect back with the main trail. The path led down a steep incline covered in wet leaves. I slipped once, catching myself on a branch, and scraped my palm. The trail dropped into a narrow ravine with steep walls. I was surrounded by tall rock and thick trees, and the light was fading fast. I decided to stop and camp there. It wasn't ideal, but it was sheltered from wind. I found a small flat area near the rock wall and set up my tent. The ground was damp, and I had to clear sticks and stones. I built a small fire with the driest wood I could find and ate a cold dinner. The fire crackled, and I sat there staring into it, thinking about the footsteps the night before. I told myself again that it had to be an animal, but deep down I didn't believe it. As night fell, the ravine became pitch black. I crawled into the tent and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement again. This time it was closer. I froze, listening. There were footsteps again, slow and steady. They came from the direction I had entered the ravine. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The steps reached the edge of my campsite and stopped. I gripped my knife inside the tent, hand shaking. Whoever or whatever it was just stood there. No sound, no movement. I lay there for what felt like an hour. Finally, I heard the steps again, slowly walking away. They disappeared into the woods. I waited until sunrise before getting out. I packed up as fast as I could and left the ravine, climbing back up the slope. The narrow trail continued for a while before fading out completely. I was deep in the forest now, and my GPS wasn't helping much because of the tree cover. I checked my printed map again and made a guess on direction. I followed what looked like a game trail, stepping over fallen trees and ducking under branches. My legs were sore, and my pack felt heavier with each mile. By late afternoon, I reached a small hill and climbed it. From the top, I could see the edge of the forest in the distance. Far beyond it, I could see the glint of a road. That was my target now. I scrambled down the hill and forced my way through the brush. It was slow going. I was scratched, tired, and thirsty. My water was almost gone. Just before sunset, I found an old cabin deep in the woods. It was small and weathered, the wood gray and the roof caved in. I checked it out and found it empty, just broken furniture and old cans. But it meant someone had been out here before. I sat down near the cabin and rested. I decided to stay the night there, too exhausted to keep going. That night, the forest stayed quiet. No footsteps, no noises. I slept in short bursts, waking often and checking my surroundings. At first light, I got moving again, heading toward the direction of the road. I didn't stop to eat, just drank the last of my water and pushed on. My body ached, and my mind kept flashing back to those footsteps. By noon, I finally broke through the tree line and came to a service road. Relief washed over me. I followed the road for another hour until I reached a ranger station. They were surprised to see me. I explained I had gotten lost and pointed out the trail I had been following. The ranger looked concerned. He said that part of the forest had been closed for a few months due to unsafe trail conditions. He also mentioned that people had reported strange things in that area. Campers hearing things, finding their gear moved, or getting lost for days. I didn't tell him everything. I just nodded, thanked him, and asked for a ride back to my car. When I finally got home that night, I was physically wrecked but thankful to be safe. I thought a lot about those nights in the woods, especially the footsteps. I'll never know who or what it was, but I haven't been on a solo hike since then. Not because I'm scared of the forest, but because I know now that out there you're not always alone. And sometimes you don't want to find out who else might be watching. That trip reminded me that nature doesn't care about your plans, your maps, or your reasons for being there. It just is. And sometimes, even in the middle of nowhere, something or someone might find you anyway. I'm not sure why I'm writing this down now. Maybe to get it out of my head. Maybe to finally feel like it's behind me. This happened 3 years ago in the summer of 2022, but I still think about it all the time. Sometimes when I'm walking down the street or just lying in bed, the whole thing comes back, and I feel that same tightness in my chest. I thought it would go away eventually, but it hasn't. Not really. I've always liked being alone in nature. Hiking was my escape. I'd go every few weekends, sometimes with friends, but mostly alone. It wasn't because I didn't have people to go with, it was just easier being by myself. No one to slow me down. No one to talk to when I didn't feel like talking. Just me, the trail, the trees, and the sky. I'd hike, take some pictures, eat a snack somewhere quiet, then head back down before dark. I lived in Northern California then. There were tons of good trails around where I lived up in Shasta County. The trail I went to that day was called Deer Ridge Loop. It was part of a bigger network of trails near Whiskeytown Lake. I'd done it once before, the full loop, about 10 miles total. It was long but not too hard. I remembered it having amazing views, lots of open ridges and forest. The last time I hiked it, I told myself I'd come back and take more time, maybe explore some of the smaller side trails that branched off it. I never got the chance. That day was hotter than usual, even for late June. I left early to beat the heat, around 7:30 in the morning. The parking area at the trailhead was empty except for one truck. That was normal. I figured someone else had gone up early like me. I had my usual gear: a 20-liter day pack, water bladder, granola bars, a few protein packs, a knife, first aid kit, and a cheap emergency beacon I'd gotten on sale a year earlier. My phone had some signal in parts of the trail, but not much. I didn't think twice about it. I was used to that. I started the loop clockwise, heading up the forested side first. The trail was mostly shaded on that side, and I made good time. I stopped to drink water every 30 minutes or so. Around mile 4, the trail opened up into a long ridge. The views were incredible, wide open sky and a long stretch of mountains fading into the distance. I sat for a while, ate one of the bars, and listened to the wind blowing through the dry brush. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. After that, I kept going until I reached a small wooden sign that said, "Old Logging Trail, 2.8 miles. I'd seen it before but had never gone that way. It looked narrower and a little overgrown, but I thought it might cut off part of the loop and lead back around to the bottom section. I pulled out my paper map. It wasn't very detailed, but it did show an old trail in the general area. The shortcut looked like it might save me a couple miles. I stood there for a minute thinking. I felt fine, had plenty of water, and the day was still young. I figured it wouldn't hurt to check it out. Worst case, I'd backtrack. So I took the turn. The trail started narrow and dry. Lots of fallen pine needles and twigs cracked under my shoes. After about 15 minutes, the path began to drop steeply downhill. It felt more like a washout than a real trail. In some parts, I had to use my hands to brace against tree trunks and rocks as I slid down. But I kept going, thinking it had to connect somewhere soon. That was my first real mistake. Another 30 minutes passed, and the trail completely faded. I looked back, and I couldn't even tell where I had come from. Everything looked the same: dried out pines, dead leaves, low bushes. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I checked the compass on the map and tried to head east, thinking I'd reconnect with the main loop or at least get closer to the road that ran past the parking lot. I walked for another hour like that, pushing through thick brush, stepping over fallen branches, sweating more than I ever had. I stopped to rest and drink. My shirt was soaked. My arms were scratched. Felt like the trail had completely disappeared. Still, I kept telling myself I wasn't lost. I had the map. I had the sun. I had water. I had my legs. I'd get back soon enough. But then the forest changed. The trees grew taller and thicker, and the undergrowth nearly vanished. The ground turned dark and soft, almost like ash. There was a strange quietness too. Not peaceful like before, but dead quiet.
No birds, no insects.
No wind, just me and the sound of my own feet. I began to feel like I was walking in circles. The trees all looked the same, tall, thin pines with long shadows. I tried to mark some trunks with my knife, but after a while I started seeing marks I swore I'd already made. My head began to hurt. I felt dizzy. I sat down on a log, drank more water, and stared at the map again. But it was useless now. None of this looked like anything on paper. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Then something strange happened. I noticed a boot print, just one, in the dirt about 20 feet ahead. It looked fresh. I hurried over to it and saw another one further down. They were pointed the same way I was going. Relief hit me all at once. Someone else had come through here. Maybe the person with the truck. Maybe they knew where they were going. I started following the tracks. They were spaced out like someone had been walking fast, maybe even running. I followed them for what felt like another half mile, but then they stopped. Just stopped. No more prints. The ground ahead was soft, but there was nothing. I looked all around, checked the nearby bushes, even climbed a small rock to scan the area. Nothing. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not just nerves, but fear that started in my stomach and spread out into my chest and arms. I wasn't just off trail anymore. I was somewhere I shouldn't be. I turned around, thinking maybe I should go back. But behind me, the prints I had been following were gone. The wind must have kicked up the dirt, or maybe I hadn't paid close enough attention. I couldn't tell anymore. I picked a direction and started walking again, this time slower. The forest kept going. I couldn't see anything but trees. I started thinking about the emergency beacon. I pulled it out, held it in my hand, and stared at the button. I didn't want to use it. It was meant for real emergencies, life or death, not just being tired and lost. But after another hour, I gave up. I pressed it. Nothing happened. No blinking light, no sound. I tapped it, shook it, even opened the case to check the battery. It was dead. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at the thing in my hand. I felt empty, like all the energy had drained out of me. I was alone in some dead part of the forest with no signal, no trail, no help. The only thing I had was the sun, which had started dropping lower in the sky. I had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. Less if the trees got thicker. I had to move. I kept walking, following the sun. East. That was the only direction I trusted. My legs burned. My feet started to swell in my boots. I drank the last of my water around 5:30. The granola bars were gone too. I still had some protein packs, but my mouth was too dry to chew. That night, I didn't make it out. When the sky went pink and the shadows stretched across the forest floor, I knew I had to stop. I found a small dip between two trees and cleared the leaves. I sat with my back against the bigger one, hugging my knees. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just closed my eyes and listened to nothing. The silence felt heavier than noise. Every now and then I thought I heard something, like crunching leaves or a soft snap, but I couldn't tell if it was real or in my head. At some point in the night, I stood up and walked in circles just to stay awake. I felt cold and hot at the same time. My mouth was dry. My lips were cracked. My thoughts were getting weird, like maybe I wasn't lost. Maybe I was just meant to be here, like this was always how it was going to end. But I kept moving. When the sun came up, I felt a little more alive. I started walking again, still east. My legs felt like stone. My stomach hurt. I sucked on a small rock to get some saliva going. I remembered reading that somewhere, and it helped a little. By late morning, I saw something. Not a road, not a trail, but a shape. Something unnatural. Metal. I ran to it. It was a rusted old fence. Beyond it, an overgrown dirt road. My heart almost gave out. I followed the road for maybe 20 minutes until I saw a small shack. Some kind of maintenance shed, probably abandoned. But behind it, past the trees, I saw power lines. That meant people. I climbed up the hill next to the lines and followed them downhill. That's when I heard it, cars. A road. I pushed through the last stretch of brush and stumbled out onto the shoulder of a 2-lane road. My knees gave out. I sat down right there on the dirt, too tired to move. An hour later, a Forest Service truck pulled up. I flagged them down, barely able to stand. I didn't say much. Couldn't. They gave me water, helped me into the truck, and drove me back to the ranger station. I didn't need a hospital, but I probably should have gone. I'd lost 10 pounds. I don't usually hike alone, but sometimes I need to clear my head. I had just gone through a rough time, work stress, arguments at home, just a constant feeling of being overwhelmed. So, when I saw a long weekend coming up, I decided I needed to get away from everything. I packed up my backpack, double-checked my gear, and headed out to a remote hiking trail in the northern part of the state that I had read about. It wasn't a popular spot, which made it perfect for some peace and quiet. The trail was called Elk Creek Ridge. Not many people went up there anymore because a new park had opened up closer to the city with well-marked trails and fancy campsites. Elk Creek was older, less maintained, and rougher. That was exactly what I wanted. I arrived at the trailhead in the late morning, parked my car in the small gravel lot, and started hiking. The air was fresh, The forest was quiet except for the sounds of birds and the crunch of my boots on dirt and leaves. I had a topographic map and a compass, and even though I had my phone, I knew service would cut out within the first few miles. The hike was beautiful. The trees were tall and dense, and the trail wound up and down through hills and valleys. After about 6 miles, I set up camp beside a small creek that ran through a flat section of the forest. I filtered water, cooked a simple meal, and watched the sun drop behind the trees as the forest slowly dimmed. It was peaceful. I slept well that night. The next day, I packed up and continued further along the trail. I planned to make a loop that would take me deeper into the forest before circling back to the trailhead in 3 days. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed something odd. A boot print, not mine. It looked fairly fresh too. That wasn't alarming by itself. Other hikers did come through here from time to time, but I hadn't seen or heard anyone since I arrived. The print looked deeper than mine, like the person was carrying something heavy. A few hours later, I found another one, then another. They were going in the same direction I was. Something about them started to bother me. The spacing was off, like the person was limping or dragging a leg. I told myself it was probably just someone with a heavy pack, maybe even someone injured trying to make it back. Still, I kept my eyes open. That evening, I made camp again, this time on a slight ridge overlooking the forest. I didn't build a fire. I rarely do when I'm alone, mostly because I don't want to draw attention. But that night, I especially didn't feel like it. I felt watched. It wasn't a strong feeling, just a quiet itch in the back of my mind. I shrugged it off. I listened to the sounds of the forest, let the silence wash over me, and eventually drifted off to sleep. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I didn't know what. I lay still, listening. The forest was too quiet. Usually, you hear bugs, distant animal calls, wind through the trees. That night, there was nothing, just silence. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear something. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, uneven footsteps coming from the direction I had come from earlier that day. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. I didn't turn on my flashlight. I didn't move. I just listened. The steps moved closer. Then they stopped. I couldn't see anything in the dark. My eyes were adjusted, but the forest was thick and the moonlight barely made it through. I stayed frozen. Minutes passed. Then I heard the steps again, moving away now, off the trail and deeper into the woods. I waited a long time before I moved. When I finally turned on my flashlight, I swept the beam slowly over the area. Nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I debated turning back, but I was already more than halfway through the loop. It would take longer to go back than to keep going. I convinced myself it was just a deer, maybe a late hiker. I didn't really believe it, but I needed to keep moving. Around noon, I found a torn piece of fabric on a low-hanging branch. It was dark gray, probably from a jacket. There was dried blood on it. That changed everything. I stopped and looked around, checking for signs of a struggle or more blood, but I didn't find anything else. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there, but I pushed on. The trail looped and started heading back toward the direction of the parking area. The forest got denser. The trail was hard to follow. I kept checking my map and compass, and even then I had to backtrack a few times. Late in the afternoon, I stumbled across an old, almost collapsed hunting blind up in a tree. The ladder was broken, but I could see pieces of tarp and old rope hanging from it. I decided to take a break near it and eat something. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were bones scattered near the base of the tree. Small ones like from rabbits or squirrels, and some larger ones too. Clean, white, sun-bleached. Someone or something had been using this area to kill and eat. I didn't see any skulls, just the bones. That meant something had carried parts away. Maybe a bear, maybe something else. I left immediately. That night, I made camp one last time before reaching the trailhead the next day. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I didn't even unroll my sleeping bag. I just sat with my back against a tree, knife in hand, listening. Around midnight, I heard the steps again. Slower this time, closer. I didn't move. The steps stopped just out of sight, maybe 30 feet away. Then I heard breathing. Slow, labored breathing. Ragged. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, the breathing stopped, and the steps moved off into the forest. I waited until dawn before I moved. I didn't pack up my gear. I just grabbed what I needed and started hiking as fast as I could. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop to drink. I moved fast, heart pounding, every shadow and sound setting me on edge. I made it back to the trailhead just after noon. My car was fine. There were no other vehicles there. I unlocked the door, threw my stuff inside, and drove until I hit the nearest gas station with a signal. I sat there in the lot for a long time before calling anyone. I reported what I found: the blood, the bones, the torn fabric. I didn't say anything about the footsteps or the breathing. I knew how that would sound. A ranger met me there and asked questions. They said they would send someone out to check the area. I never heard back. Weeks passed. I tried to forget it, but I kept thinking about those boot prints, the limp, the breathing, the fact that it never came all the way into my camp, like it didn't want to be seen, or couldn't. I still go hiking, but I don't go alone anymore, and I don't go off into remote trails where I won't see anyone for days. Whatever was out there, whether it was a person or something worse, not something supernatural, but something broken, desperate, and dangerous, I don't want to ever run into it again. I'm just glad I got out of there. I know how close I was. If I had taken a different trail or set camp a few feet further off the path, maybe it would have found me. But it didn't, and I'm still here. That trip taught me something. Nature isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it hides things, people, secrets, and sometimes, if you're not careful, you become one of them. I never thought a solo hike would turn into one of the worst experiences of my life. I had hiked alone before, many times, so I wasn't nervous when I planned a 3-day hike through a remote stretch of national forest in northern Montana. The trail was supposed to be challenging but not dangerous, and I had read that it was mostly used by serious hikers who knew what they were doing. That made me feel like I'd have enough solitude, but also some comfort in knowing I wasn't completely alone in the wilderness. I started early in the morning, around 6:30 a.m., after parking my truck at the small gravel trailhead. There was only one other car there, which didn't bother me. The air was cool and crisp, and the trees still held that damp morning smell. I was carrying a 45-pound pack with everything I needed: tent, sleeping bag, food for 4 days, water, a filter, bear spray, and a first aid kit. I had a paper map and a compass, and my phone had GPS, though I expected it wouldn't have service after a few miles. The first day was perfect. The trail wound through thick pine forest, then opened up onto a high ridge with views of the mountains in the distance. I followed switchbacks down into a narrow valley and stopped near a cold stream to refill my water. I hiked about 12 miles that day, finally setting up camp near a rocky outcrop where I could see the stars at night. I cooked some freeze-dried pasta, ate quietly while watching the sky turn orange, and went to bed feeling calm and content. The second day started just as smooth. I packed up and continued along the trail, which followed a creek for a few miles before climbing again. I saw some elk tracks, even a fresh pile of scat, but no animals. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a fork in the trail. According to my map, both paths eventually joined the same trail again, but one went over a ridge while the other cut through a narrow canyon. I chose the canyon route. It looked a bit shorter, and I figured it would be cooler in the shade. As I hiked deeper into the canyon, the air grew still and damp. The walls on either side rose steeply, covered in moss and dark with moisture. I stopped hearing birds. Even the sound of the wind seemed to fade out. It wasn't eerie at first, just quiet. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, but that feeling changed after a few more miles. The path narrowed and became rough, more like a game trail than a maintained route. I checked my map again, making sure I hadn't taken a wrong turn, but it seemed right. I kept going, though slower now. Around 5 p.m., I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker or any kind of sign in over an hour. My map wasn't detailed enough to show every twist of the canyon, and I started getting the uneasy feeling that I had veered off the main trail somehow. I decided to backtrack. I turned around and started walking the way I came, looking for familiar spots or footprints. But everything started to look the same. Moss-covered rocks, damp soil, leaning trees. I couldn't find anything that I remembered clearly. After about 30 minutes of walking, I stopped and took off my pack to rest. That's when I first noticed something that really rattled me. My boot prints were gone. I had been walking through mud and soft dirt, so I should have seen my own prints from earlier. But there were none. Not one. The trail behind me looked untouched, like no one had walked through there at all. That didn't make sense. Even if rain had come through, it would have left some sign, but everything looked dry and undisturbed. I tried to stay calm. Maybe I had wandered off my own path while trying to backtrack. That made more sense than someone or something erasing my prints. I took a deep breath, checked my compass, and decided to head north. According to the map, that should eventually lead me back toward the ridge and rejoin the main trail. I hiked for another hour, bushwhacking more than following any real path. The brush was thick in some places, and I had to push through low branches and thorns. My arms got scratched, and I could feel sweat soaking through my shirt and waistband. I kept checking my compass and map, adjusting slightly whenever I felt like I was drifting too far off course. By 7:30, the light started fading. I hadn't made it back to any recognizable trail, and the trees around me looked older, taller, and more dense. I set up camp in a small clearing and ate a protein bar for dinner. I tried to stay positive. I wasn't out of food, I had water and shelter, and I had tools to find my way back. People got off trail sometimes, and most of the time they made it out fine. That night I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up to tiny noises outside the tent. Snaps, rustles, faint shuffles. It might have been small animals or maybe just the trees settling, but every sound felt sharper, closer. Once I sat up and grabbed the bear spray because I swore I heard something breathing just outside the tent wall. I didn't unzip it to check. In the morning, I packed up fast. I decided to go east this time, toward a high hill I could barely see through the trees. If I could get to the top, maybe I could see where I was and spot a landmark. It took most of the morning to climb that slope. When I reached the top, I looked out over miles of forest. No roads, no buildings, no smoke from camps. Just trees and sky and rock. I sat down and really studied the map, trying to match what I saw with the terrain. I spotted what I thought might be the ridge I had crossed on the first day. If I could make it there, I could probably find the trail again. It looked about 6 or 7 miles away, as the crow flies, probably double that on foot. I started hiking that direction. For the first few hours, I felt like I was making good progress. Then I started noticing something that stopped me cold. I came across a pile of broken branches, all snapped in a strange way, like someone had twisted them. A few yards later, I found an empty plastic water bottle. I didn't use that brand. Then I saw a torn piece of blue tarp, stuck on a tree branch. It looked old, like it had been there a while. I kept walking and found more signs. A piece of rope, a rusted tin can. Then, worst of all, I found a campsite. It was half collapsed, overgrown, and abandoned. The tent was shredded. There was an old pot, black from fire soot, and a sleeping bag full of leaves and mold. I looked around and didn't see any bones or clothes, but the place felt wrong, like it had been left in a hurry. No trash, no food, just a shell of a camp. I didn't stay long. I moved faster after that. I wanted to get out of that part of the forest, but the terrain started working against me. Thick brush, fallen logs, steep little gullies that didn't show up on my map. I twisted my ankle slipping on a mossy rock. It wasn't broken, but it hurt with every step. I had to stop and wrap it using some gauze from the first aid kit. That slowed me down a lot. By the time the sun started going down again, I was still deep in the woods. I hadn't found the ridge. I hadn't even seen anything that looked close. I pitched the tent again, ate a granola bar, and forced myself to stay awake a little longer. I didn't want another night full of strange noises. I read a few pages from a book I had packed. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime during the night, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, like someone was watching me. I lay there, not moving, barely breathing. Then I heard something crunch softly outside the tent. Not like a squirrel or raccoon, something heavier. Slow steps. I reached for the bear spray. The footsteps circled the tent once. Then silence. I waited, gripping the can, every muscle tight. Finally, after what felt like hours, I heard birds start to chirp. The gray light of dawn came. I opened the tent slowly. Nothing was there. No tracks, no broken branches, just the same forest. I packed up again, ignoring the pain in my ankle. I kept heading east. I moved slow but steady. Around noon, I finally saw something familiar. A wooden trail marker, half rotted but still standing. It pointed toward a trail I recognized from the first day. I almost cried. I followed it for hours, limping but determined. Just before sunset, I reached a small ranger station. It was empty, but there was a radio and a trail map pinned to the wall. I found my location. I was nearly 20 miles from where I had meant to be. I stayed there that night inside the shelter of the station. The next day, I followed a service road that eventually led me to a campground. I found help there. A family gave me a ride back to my truck. My legs were cut up, my ankle swollen, and I had lost nearly 8 pounds, but I was alive. I never found out what happened in that canyon. I don't know if I got turned around or if there really was no clear trail. I don't know who left that abandoned camp. I never reported it. I couldn't explain it well enough. I just wanted to go home. That was 3 years ago. I still hike, but I never go alone anymore. And I never, ever stray from the marked trail. I've always liked hiking alone. There's something about being deep in the woods with just the sound of your own breathing and the wind in the trees. No traffic noise, no phones ringing, just peace. Maybe a little fear sometimes, but mostly peace. I've done solo hikes for over 10 years. Long trails, short trails, local routes, national parks, you name it. I've been to mountains in Colorado, forests in Oregon, deserts in Nevada. But the one that stuck with me the most was a hike I took in 2021, somewhere in northern Idaho. That one almost ended badly, very badly. I never wrote it down before, but I guess I'm finally ready. It was early September. The weather was just starting to shift. Mornings were cold, but the sun still came out in the afternoon. I had some vacation days saved up, and I'd been researching lesser-known trails for a while. One trail caught my attention, Wolf Pine Ridge Trail. I found it mentioned in a hiking forum. Not many people had hiked it recently, but the area looked promising. It was near a small town called Dry Creek. The trailhead was about 45 minutes out, mostly gravel roads. A few people said it was rugged, not well maintained, but quiet and beautiful. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light but smart. My pack had a small tent, a sleeping bag, extra layers, a headlamp, a gas burner, some freeze-dried meals, a water filter, and a map of the forest area. I also had my Garmin GPS unit fully charged and a paper backup map just in case. I brought a first aid kit, bear spray, and my pocket knife. I always let my brother know where I'm going before a solo hike, and this time was no different. I sent him the coordinates and told him I'd check in through satellite once a day. I started the hike around 11 a.m. The trail was as described, rugged, narrow, and mostly uphill for the first couple miles. Trees surrounded me from all sides, pines and spruce mostly, with the occasional deadfall lying across the path. Some sections had faded trail markers, but a lot of it was just following the packed dirt and guessing. Still, it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. About 4 miles in, I reached a flat ridge that opened up to an amazing view. Hills stretched out in layers, and the sunlight fell through the trees in golden lines. I took my pack off, sat down, and ate a snack. Felt peaceful. That kind of peace you only get when you're far away from everything. After a break, I got moving again. My goal was to reach a small creek about 9 miles in and camp there overnight. That would give me time to rest, filter water, and turn back the next day. That was the plan. But plans don't always go the way you want them to. Around mile 7, I came to a fork in the trail. There was no mention of it on the map or in the GPS track I downloaded. One path looked like it curved uphill, and the other dipped down into a thicker patch of woods. There was no sign, no marker, just two dirt paths with leaves and roots tangled across both. I stopped and pulled out the GPS. It was glitching. The little arrow that showed my position froze, then spun, then disappeared completely. I turned it off and on again. Nothing. I figured it was just the tree cover messing with the signal. I looked at the paper map. It was old, not detailed enough. No fork marked at all. I stood there for 5 minutes, unsure. I knew the creek was somewhere southeast, so I took the trail that dipped lower. I figured it might lead to the valley where the creek was. That was the mistake. The trail narrowed fast. After a few hundred feet, it was barely visible at all. Just a rough cut through the undergrowth. The trees got closer together. I kept going because I thought maybe it would open up again. I didn't want to backtrack unless I had to, but it didn't open up. The light started to fade. I looked at my watch. It was 4:45 p.m. I decided to set up camp before it got dark. I found a small clearing that was flat enough to pitch my tent. I cleared the ground, set up the tent, and made a quick meal on the burner. As the darkness came in, I felt a strange quiet in the woods. No birds, no crickets, just whined through the branches. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every little snap in the woods had me wide awake. I kept imagining things. Footsteps, heavy breathing, branches breaking. I told myself it was deer or raccoons, but it didn't help. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard a dragging sound behind the tent. Slow, dry. Then it stopped. I laid there frozen for 20 minutes, too scared to move. Eventually, I drifted into a light sleep. Morning finally came, cold and gray. I got up fast, packed everything, and decided to hike back to the main trail. I didn't want to follow that same path again, so I tried to bushwhack slightly northwest, hoping to intersect the upper trail where the fork had been. The problem was I didn't find it. I walked for an hour through thick woods. No trail, just fallen logs, brush, and mud. My legs were scratched. I slipped a few times and landed hard on my side. I tried the GPS again, still frozen. No signal. I climbed up a small hill to try and get a better view, but all I saw were more trees and hills. No clearings, no signs. That's when panic started to creep in. I wasn't lost, but I was definitely off trail. I had enough food and water for maybe 2 days. The forest was huge. If I wandered in the wrong direction for too long, it could be bad. I stopped and took a break under a large pine tree. I told myself to calm down and think. I still had my compass. I knew the road was west. I figured I'd keep moving west until I hit something. A road, a trail, anything. So I started walking, slowly, carefully. I tried to mark trees with a knife every few hundred feet just in case I had to double back. By early afternoon, I noticed something strange. There were signs that people had been here, but not recently. I saw an old fire ring made of stones, half collapsed, a rusty can near a tree, a torn piece of tarp hanging from a branch, all faded. I guess someone had camped here a long time ago, maybe hunters or hikers. It made me feel a bit better, but not much. That night, I set up camp again in a dry patch under a fir tree. I ate the last of my warm meals and crawled into the sleeping bag. I kept the bear spray close. I heard something again, crunching leaves, stopping, then crunching again. Not fast, not loud, but steady. I didn't move. I just waited. The sounds faded after a while. I don't know what it was. Next morning, I was sore and cold. My legs were stiff. My arms ached from pushing through branches all day. I looked worse than I felt. Dirt in my face, small cuts on my hands, but I kept walking. Around noon, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was one of the trees I had marked the day before. My mark, my cut. I had walked in a circle. I sat down and nearly cried. All that effort and I had looped back to the same place. I must have veered without realizing. The woods were so thick, I'd lost my direction. That's when I started to really feel fear. Not the kind of fear you feel when you hear a sound outside your tent. Real fear, the kind that grows in your stomach and crawls up your chest. I forced myself to eat and drink. Then I changed my plan. Instead of moving blindly west, I decided to follow the slope of the land. Streams and valleys usually lead to people. Roads are often built near water. I listened for water and eventually heard a faint trickle downhill. I followed it for hours. The stream was small, barely more than a trickle, but it grew wider as I went. I kept slipping on wet rocks and moss. My boots were soaked, my hands numb, but I didn't stop. Just before sundown, I saw something that gave me a bit of hope. An old hunting stand, half rotten, built into a tree. Someone had been out here before. Maybe there was a road nearby. I camped under that stand. That night was cold, the coldest yet. I could see my breath even inside the tent. I had one emergency blanket and wrapped myself in it. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun. The next morning, I kept following the stream. My legs felt like stone. I stumbled often. My stomach was empty, and I was starting to feel lightheaded. Around midday, the trees began to thin out. I pushed through a final wall of brush and found myself standing on a gravel road. I almost collapsed. It was an old service road. I didn't know where it led, but it didn't matter. I followed it for miles. After a few hours, I heard a distant engine. A truck came around the bend, and I flagged it down with both arms. The driver was a logging company worker. He looked shocked to see me. I must have looked terrible. Dirt, cuts, bags under my eyes. I told him I was hiking and got lost. He gave me water, a protein bar, and let me sit in the truck. He drove me back to the small ranger station miles away. I called my brother that night. He'd been worried. I was 2 days. I don't think I've ever written about this before. Not in full, at least. A lot of it still plays in my head at night when I lie awake. Not every night anymore, but enough. Sometimes it's just a sound that brings it back. Other times it's a certain smell, pine needles and wet dirt mostly. And then there are those quiet moments in the middle of nowhere when I feel the silence press too close. That's when I remember the hike I took 3 years ago. The one that changed how I see everything. It was the summer of 2022. I had just turned 29 and decided I needed a break from the city. My job was burning me out. I wasn't eating right, wasn't sleeping well. Everything felt loud and constant. So I picked a trail I had always wanted to do, an isolated ridge loop in the Pacific Northwest. Not one of those tourist-heavy national park hikes. This was a bit more out of the way, something recommended on a hiking forum by a guy who said he'd only seen 2 people on it over a span of 3 days. That sounded perfect to me. I planned everything down to the last detail, mapped the route, packed dehydrated food, checked the weather forecast every day for a week. The plan was a solo 3-day loop starting from a gravel trailhead about 2 hours from the nearest town. No cell reception, which I expected. The route would climb along a forested ridgeline, dip into a valley with a stream, then climb again before circling back. It was supposed to be moderately difficult, mostly single-track trail with a few steep areas. I left on a Thursday morning. I didn't tell many people, just a friend and my older brother. I sent them my plan, told them I'd be back by Sunday night. I even bought a PLB, a personal locator beacon, just in case. The drive out was peaceful. Rolling hills, tall pines, and not a car in sight for the last hour. I reached the trailhead around 10:30 a.m., parked my car in the small dirt lot, and shouldered my pack. It was quiet, almost unnaturally so. I remember standing there for a moment, just listening. No wind, no birds, just that kind of stillness that feels heavy in your ears. The first few miles of the hike were uneventful. The trail climbed steadily through thick forest. The air smelled clean, like bark and earth. My boots crunched softly over pine needles. Everything looked healthy and untouched. I didn't see anyone, just squirrels, a few deer in the distance. The sun cut through the trees in long beams. I felt good, like I'd finally made the right call taking this break. By late afternoon, I had climbed to the first ridge. I took a break at a small overlook, drank some water, and ate trail mix. I could see the deep green valley below and the second ridge across from it. That was tomorrow's goal. I felt a little sore, but nothing unusual. I hiked a little farther and set up camp in a flat spot a few yards off trail. Nothing fancy, just my tent, a small fire ring, and a rock to sit on. As the sun dipped below the trees, the air cooled quickly. I boiled water for dinner, ate quietly, then just sat for a while as dusk came in. The silence out there was different from city quiet. It was thick, every sound carried far. The snap of a twig, the rustle of a small animal. Every time I heard something, my head turned. I finally crawled into my tent and fell asleep without much trouble. Sometime during the night, I woke up. There were footsteps outside my tent. I froze. Not animal movement. Footsteps. Slow, steady, soft but clearly bipedal. They crunched over twigs and pine needles. My hand moved to the small knife I kept inside my sleeping bag. I lay perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The steps circled my tent once, then stopped. I didn't breathe. I waited. Nothing. Just silence again. Then I heard them walk away, slowly, steadily, until the sound was gone. I stayed awake the rest of the night. By morning, I was trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it was my own movement in the bag. I didn't see anyone when I unzipped the tent. The area around was undisturbed. I packed up and moved on quickly. The trail dropped down into the valley, thick with ferns and moss. The stream was ice cold, but I filled my bottle anyway. I passed the spot I had planned to camp that second night, but felt uneasy about staying in one place again. So I kept going, pushing farther up the second ridge. The trail was rougher here, less maintained. The trees were denser. The air felt cooler. About 6 miles in, I noticed the trail started fading. It hadn't been like this on the map. There were still some markers, faded paint on trees, but they were spaced far apart, and sections of the trail looked washed out. At one point, I had to cross a steep slope where the path had crumbled away. I had to inch along, pressing myself to the rock wall beside me. Once across, I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in over an hour. I checked my map and GPS, but the signal was weak, and the path didn't match perfectly with my surroundings. I was still moving in the right general direction, so I decided to keep going. It was mid-afternoon by then, and I didn't want to backtrack across the crumbling slope again. Then the trail vanished completely. I stood in a clearing, expecting to see the trail pick up on the far side, but there was nothing, just underbrush, rocks, and thick trees. I walked in a wide circle, looking for any sign, but the trail was gone. It was like it had been swallowed. At this point, I was frustrated and starting to get nervous. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. Moss, roots, fallen logs, no markers, no clear direction. I climbed a boulder for a better view, hoping to spot the ridge or the stream behind me, but all I saw was trees in every direction. I was lost. I've done enough hiking to know what that means. Panic only makes things worse. So I sat down, drank some water, and tried to think clearly. I still had food, still had daylight. I marked my location with a piece of bright tape on a branch, then started moving in a grid, trying to relocate the trail. Hours passed. The sun started dropping behind the trees. I didn't find the trail. By evening, I knew I had to stop and set up camp. It wasn't safe to keep walking. I found a slightly raised area to avoid water runoff, cleared a space, and set up my tent. I didn't eat much. I kept listening. Every little crack of a branch made my skin crawl. I kept thinking about those footsteps from the first night. What if someone else was out here, hiding? That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing movement again. Not constant, but enough to keep me wide awake. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes farther. Once, I thought I saw a shadow move just outside the tent. But when I looked, there was nothing. By morning, I was exhausted but knew I had to keep trying. I couldn't just wait and hope. I turned on my PLB, but the light didn't blink. Nothing. It was dead. It must have gotten damaged at some point. Maybe when I slipped on the ridge. I cursed myself. That beacon was supposed to be my backup plan. I packed up and started walking in the direction I thought might lead back. I tried marking trees with tape as I went. I even left small stacks of stones. But the deeper I went, the worse things got. The terrain grew steeper, more tangled. Fallen trees blocked my path. Some sections were dense with thorny bushes that cut at my legs. By late afternoon, I knew I was going the wrong way. The light was dimmer than it should have been. The forest floor was darker. I stumbled more than once. My legs ached. My water was low. I thought about the stream, but I had no idea how far away it was now. Then I found something. It was a tarp, faded blue, half covered in dirt and leaves. Nearby, there was a crushed aluminum pot, a torn shirt, and bones. They were old, picked clean, scattered, but unmistakably human. I froze. Everything went cold. My mind raced. This wasn't just someone who got lost. Whoever this was, they died out here, and no one found them. I backed away slowly. I didn't touch anything. Couldn't. I kept walking, faster now, heart racing. But everywhere started to look the same again. No trail, no sound of water, just forest pressing close from all sides. I didn't stop walking until it was nearly dark. I was running on instinct. I didn't even set up my tent that night. I just rolled into my sleeping bag near the base of a tree and kept the knife in my hand. At some point, I dozed off. A sound woke me again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was breathing, slow, just outside the bag. I didn't move. Then it stopped. I sat up slowly, looked around. Nothing. No shape. No flashlight beam. Just dark trees and faint stars above. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, I started climbing. I figured if I could get high enough, maybe I could spot a ridge or valley. Something familiar. The climb was rough, loose rock and steep inclines. But after nearly 2 hours, I reached a small outcropping that looked over the trees. I always liked hiking alone. It was something about the silence and stillness out in the woods that felt comforting. No traffic, no phone buzzing, no noise except for birds or wind pushing through the trees. I wasn't some expert mountaineer or survivalist, but I had been hiking for years and had a good understanding of how to handle myself outdoors. I planned everything ahead of time, checked weather reports, studied maps, packed gear carefully, and made sure someone always knew where I was going. This trip was no different, or at least that's what I thought. The plan was simple. I was going to hike a loop around a lesser-known area called Sable Ridge, located in the northern part of Montana. I had picked it because it was quiet, off-season, and I knew it wouldn't be crowded. It was late September, and the weather was still decent, cool but not freezing, just the way I liked it. I had set up a 4-day route that would take me up into the ridge, loop me around a lake, and then circle back down to my starting point. I'd sleep in a tent each night at different clearings I had picked out while studying the area on a topographic map. I arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, parked my truck in the dirt lot, and started my hike before the sun had even cleared the tops of the trees. The forest was quiet and damp, the air fresh with a little chill that felt good against my skin. I moved along the trail at a steady pace, breathing deep and enjoying the stillness. My pack was a little heavy: tent, sleeping bag, water bladder, dry food, small cook kit, a knife, first aid kit, extra clothes, and emergency gear, but I had carried heavier before. I was used to this. The first day was easy. I followed the trail markers, passed a few streams, and reached my first campsite by early afternoon. It was a small, flat clearing not far from a creek. I set up my tent, filtered some water, cooked a quick meal, and spent the evening writing in my small notebook. The only sounds were the rush of the creek and an occasional rustle in the brush, probably squirrels or deer. I went to sleep early and slept well. The second day was when things started to shift. I woke up early again, broke camp, and started moving before sunrise. The trail was steeper now, climbing into the rocky parts of the ridge. There were more switchbacks, and I had to take breaks to catch my breath. The higher I went, the quieter it got. I didn't see any birds, and the trees started thinning out. The terrain became harder: roots, loose rocks, steeper climbs. I passed through a narrow pass where the wind cut through hard and cold. I zipped up my jacket and kept going. By early afternoon, I reached a fork in the trail that wasn't on the map. One path looked like a continuation of the trail I had been following, well-worn, wide, and marked with an old wooden sign that pointed west toward the lake I planned to camp near that night. The other was narrower, looked less traveled, and veered off more sharply downhill. There was no sign, just a broken post lying in the dirt. I should have followed the planned route. I don't know why I didn't. I stood there for a while, looking at the map, squinting at the terrain, trying to line it up. Maybe the map was old. Maybe the lake trail had shifted. I convinced myself that the narrower trail was a shortcut or an old route that would reconnect later. I don't know why I thought that, but I did, and I turned onto it. Right away, it felt different. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail wasn't worn. It was visible, but just barely. No boot prints, no broken branches, no signs anyone had come this way recently. But I kept going, figuring it would link back up eventually. I walked for an hour, then two. The trail started dropping fast, winding back and forth between tall trees and thick underbrush. The air felt heavier down here, and it got darker even though the sky was still clear above. Eventually, the trail just ended. It faded into a mess of roots and brush near the bottom of a small ravine. I looked around for a few minutes, trying to find any sign that it continued, but there was nothing. I realized then that I had gone off course, and it was getting late. I tried to backtrack, but something had changed. I couldn't find the same path I had come down. I moved carefully, retracing steps, scanning the ground, but everything looked the same now. Trees, rocks, moss-covered ground. I circled for nearly an hour, but it felt like I was going in loops. I checked my GPS, but there was no signal. My phone battery was at 45%. I had brought a small solar charger, but it wouldn't do much in these trees. I had a compass and map, but without knowing exactly where I had gone off trail, I couldn't pinpoint my location. I figured the best thing to do was stay put for the night and try again in the morning. I found a dry, flat spot under a cluster of pine trees and set up my tent. That night felt different than the first. I heard no wind, no water, no animals. It was dead silent. At one point, I thought I heard soft crunching somewhere off in the distance, but when I held my breath and listened, it stopped. I told myself it was probably deer, but something didn't feel right. I kept my knife close and barely slept. The next morning, I packed up quickly and tried again to find the trail. I moved slowly, carefully, scanning every direction, trying to climb uphill and reorient myself. I used the compass to aim northwest, the general direction of the lake and the original trail. I hiked for hours, but the forest just kept stretching out in every direction. No trail, no markers, nothing man-made. I crossed a small stream and followed it uphill, hoping it would lead somewhere. But all it did was wind through thicker and rougher terrain. That night, I made another camp, this time under a rocky overhang. I built a small fire even though I was trying to conserve fuel. I just needed light and heat. It was colder now, and the silence was deeper. Around midnight, I woke up to a distant cracking sound, like a tree limb snapping. Then more crunching, slower this time, heavier. I stayed completely still, listening, heart pounding. After a while, the sound faded. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By the fourth day, I was low on food and exhausted. My water was okay. I had the stream, but mentally I was wearing down. I had been hiking nonstop, off-trail, lost in a maze of identical trees and rocky slopes. My feet hurt, my knees were sore, and my mind kept drifting into worst-case thoughts. Injuries, bears, dehydration, hypothermia. I pushed them out, kept moving, kept searching. That afternoon, I found something. A weathered structure, wooden, collapsed mostly, looked like it had been a small cabin or shack. The roof had caved in and most of the wood was rotting. There were rusted metal tools scattered around and an old tin bucket. I searched the area, hoping someone had built it near a trail or road, but there was nothing else around, just more forest. I spent the night nearby, too tired to keep going. I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up to the wind, or at least what I thought was wind. Sometimes it sounded like whispering through the trees, or soft movement just out of sight. But when I shined my light, there was nothing. By the fifth day, I was almost out of food. My phone battery was almost dead. I had half a granola bar left and 1 pack of trail mix. I knew I had to move fast or things were going to go downhill fast. I decided to follow the terrain downhill, figuring that water would lead to a river, and rivers often lead to roads or settlements. It was a risk, but staying put wasn't helping anymore. I moved fast, skipping breaks, ignoring the pain in my legs. I crossed another stream and followed it, slipping on rocks and nearly twisting my ankle more than once. I saw bear tracks once, fresh, but I didn't stop. I moved faster, louder, not caring anymore about staying quiet. Then, late that afternoon, I saw something through the trees. A fence. A rusted metal fence, part of what looked like an old property line. I climbed over it and pushed through more brush. A few minutes later, I stumbled out onto a dirt road. I dropped to my knees right there. I just sat, breathing hard, shaking. I wasn't safe yet, but it was something. I pulled out my phone, and for the first time in days, I had 1 bar of service. I sent out a location pin and a text to my brother. Then I waited. About an hour later, an old pickup truck came down the road. A man in his 60s stopped and offered to help. I didn't say much, just asked him to drive me to the nearest town. I stayed quiet the whole ride, just staring out the window, trying to come back to normal. I had lost almost 9 pounds in those days. My boots were torn, my legs covered in cuts and bruises, and I had frostbite starting on 2 of my toes. I got lucky. I know that now. If I hadn't found that fence, if I had waited 1 more day, I don't know if I'd be writing this right now. I've gone hiking again since then, but I plan everything even more carefully now. I don't take unknown trails. I don't chase shortcuts. I carry better gear, and I never, ever ignore my gut. That wrong turn near Sable Ridge taught me something real. Something that sticks in the back of my mind every time I hear a branch snap out in the woods. Nature doesn't care about your plans. If you don't respect it, if you make 1 small mistake, I had been planning that solo hiking trip for months. I was tired of staring at screens, tired of traffic, tired of the constant noise that never seemed to stop. I needed space, real space. So when I finally got a week off work in late October, I packed my gear, loaded up my old SUV, and made the drive out to the mountains. I chose a lesser-known trail in Wyoming, one that looped through a national forest, climbed a ridge, and curved back around through a quiet valley. It was marked as difficult and remote, exactly what I was looking for. I checked the weather before I left. It said dry for the week, maybe a bit chilly at night. Perfect. I wanted to sleep in my tent under the stars and get away from everything. I brought my GPS, paper maps, enough food for a week, a water filter, a knife, 2 flashlights, an extra phone battery, and a basic med kit. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd done plenty of solo trips before, just nothing quite this long or this remote. The first day was everything I hoped for. I parked at a small dirt lot near the trailhead and hiked in maybe 10 miles. The path was narrow but easy to follow. The air was crisp. Yellow and orange leaves clung to the trees, though a good number had fallen and covered the trail. I only saw 2 other hikers on their way out, and they looked tired but friendly. I nodded at them and moved on. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing just off the path near a stream. I set up my tent, filtered water, made some food, and sat with my back against a rock until the sun went down. No sounds but wind in the trees and the trickle of the stream. Felt right. I slept hard that night. The second day, I went deeper into the forest. The trail became rockier, and the trees grew closer together. It wasn't difficult to follow, but I had to pay more attention to the blazes painted on the trunks. I didn't see anyone, not a single person all day, just a few deer and what I think was a fox, darting through the underbrush. I reached a flat ridge that opened to a view of the valley below. The sun was starting to dip, and everything looked gold and quiet and endless. I pitched my tent at the edge of the ridge, careful not to go too close. It got colder that night, but I had layers. Still, something about the silence started to feel different. Not bad, just heavier. I brushed it off. The third day is when things started to shift. I woke up earlier than I meant to. The sun hadn't fully come up, and everything was gray and cold. My breath came out in clouds. I packed up and started hiking before breakfast, chewing on a granola bar as I went. The trail dipped into a dense forest with thick, old trees. It felt darker down there, even when the sun finally rose. I noticed the trail was harder to follow. The blazes were older, some nearly faded, and fallen leaves covered large sections of the dirt path. I checked my map and GPS regularly, not because I felt lost, but just to be safe. I kept making progress, and around mid-afternoon, I came across an old wooden sign nailed to a tree. It was cracked and tilted, the letters barely readable. It looked like it once pointed to a fork in the trail, but the sign was faded, and the fork barely looked like a path anymore. My map didn't show a fork at that point. It only showed a straight line continuing south. I stood there for a while, unsure. The GPS told me to keep going forward, so I did. That night, I camped near a small ravine, with the sound of rushing water somewhere below. Couldn't see it, just heard it. It was colder again, and I had to wear all my layers in the sleeping bag. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up for no reason. I lay still, listening. Nothing, just wind. I must have drifted back off. The next morning is when I started to notice that something wasn't right. I got up, packed everything, and went to check the GPS. The screen was frozen. I tried restarting it. Nothing. I pulled out my backup battery and phone. The phone powered on, but it couldn't get a signal or load any maps. The GPS still wouldn't turn back on. I figured it might have just gotten too cold during the night. I put it in my jacket, hoping it'd come back to life once it warmed up. I kept hiking. The trail was barely visible now. I had to slow down and double-check the tree blazes. Some had been scratched off. Others were so faint I only spotted them because I was specifically looking. I started to think that maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. The map didn't match what I was seeing anymore. I came across rocks that weren't marked, dead trees that didn't show on the topography. My pace slowed way down. Around mid-afternoon, I realized I hadn't seen a single blaze in over an hour. I stopped, pulled out my paper map, and tried to find a landmark. Anything. Nothing looked right. The trees were thicker now, almost suffocating. The air felt still, like everything was holding its breath. I wasn't panicking yet, but I could feel the pressure in my chest start to build. I decided to backtrack to the last place I was sure about, the wooden sign. But that was the problem. I didn't remember which way I came from. Every direction looked the same now. I started walking in the direction I thought was right, but I wasn't sure. After about 20 minutes, I realized I hadn't seen anything familiar. No blazes, no signs, no fork. Just endless trees and moss-covered rocks. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I just rolled out my sleeping bag against a large boulder and kept my flashlight and knife close. I barely slept. Every sound made me sit up. Branches creaking, something scuttling through the brush, the wind making the trees groan. I kept telling myself I'd figure it out in the morning. The fourth day, I tried to climb higher ground to get a better view. I found a hill covered in dead pine needles and scrambled up, slipping a few times. At the top, I looked around. Just forest in every direction. No clearings, no rivers, no trails, no signs of people. It hit me then I was truly lost, not just confused. I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know how to get back. I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered my training. Don't wander aimlessly. I marked a tree with my knife, tied a strip of red cloth to it, and moved in one direction slowly, marking trees as I went. After an hour, I came back to the cloth. Full circle. I tried a different direction. Same result. I wasn't just lost. I was going in circles without knowing it. My food was starting to run low now. I had rationed it, but I hadn't planned for more than 7 days. I still had water from the stream I crossed the day before, but I didn't know how far that ran. I set up camp early that day, exhausted from climbing and walking. I ate a small portion of nuts and jerky, drank a little water, and tried to rest. I kept hearing things that night. Not animals, not regular forest noises. I kept hearing what sounded like sticks snapping nearby. Then silence. I'd sit up, shine the flashlight, and see nothing. Just trees. The 5th day was the worst. I woke up feeling sick. My head throbbed, and my mouth was dry. I think I was getting dehydrated. I checked the last of my water, less than half a liter. I packed up and moved downhill, hoping to find the stream again. After hours of stumbling through thick brush, thorns, and deadfall, I heard the sound of running water. I rushed toward it, slipping on wet rocks, pushing branches out of my way. I found a narrow stream, colder than ice, running down a rocky slope. I dropped to my knees and filled my bottle, filtering it, drinking, then filling it again. I sat there for a long time trying to regain strength. When I finally stood, I realized I had no idea which direction I'd come from. I hadn't marked the trees. I was too focused on the water. Stupid mistake. I picked a direction and followed the stream for a while, but it started narrowing, then disappearing underground. I turned back, but the rocks all looked the same now. The trees didn't help. They were tall, straight, and lifeless. No blazes, no signs. The sun dipped fast behind the trees. The forest got dark way quicker than it should have. I scrambled to make a fire that night, using the fire starter in my kit and dry twigs. Took longer than usual. My hands were shaking. My stomach hurt from hunger. I sat by the fire, staring into it, trying not to think too much. That night, I heard movement again. Closer this time. Not just one noise, but several. Like something circling me. I stood up, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, scanning the trees. I didn't see anything, but I knew something was out there. Maybe a bear, maybe wolves, maybe just my mind messing with me. But it didn't stop. Every time I sat down, more snapping, more rustling. I barely slept, just rested with my back against the rock, gripping the knife. The 6th day, I was weak. I ate the last of my food. I still had water, but no energy. I could barely stand without feeling dizzy. I started walking again. No direction, just walking, hoping for a road, a sign, anything. Midday, I came across something that stopped me cold. A boot, lying by itself in the leaves, weathered, but not complete. I don't tell this story much. It's not the kind of thing that makes you look brave, but it stayed in my head every day since it happened. It was supposed to be a quick solo hike before winter hit hard, something to clear my head. I had time off from work and needed to get out. I chose a lesser-known trail in Colorado, up near the San Juan Mountains. The weather was holding, and I figured I'd have one last shot before the snow rolled in. I got to the trailhead around 9 in the morning. My backpack was packed light water, a few protein bars, a knife, a thermal blanket, flashlight, a map, and a small first aid kit. I wasn't planning on staying out long, just a loop, maybe 10 miles tops. The sky was clear, chilly but not cold, and there was that clean smell in the air that only comes with mountain air and pine. The first few miles were easy. The trail was narrow but well used. It wound through a forest of tall trees and dry needles underfoot. I didn't see anyone else, but that wasn't unusual. Most people stuck to more popular trails. I liked the quiet. I liked the crunch of leaves under my boots and the sound of birds moving through the trees. I took a few breaks to drink water and kept a steady pace. Around mile 5, I came across an unmarked path. It was faint, just a strip of worn dirt leading off to the right. I stopped and looked at it. It didn't show on my paper map, but I was curious. Maybe it was a shortcut or an old logging road. Cut through a stand of bare trees. Looked a little rougher than what I'd been on, but I figured I'd follow it for a bit and turn back if it got sketchy. That was the first mistake. The new path curved slowly uphill. It wasn't too steep, but it was rocky and uneven. There were fallen branches, signs that no one had been on it in a long time. I kept thinking it might rejoin the main trail eventually. I walked for about an hour, maybe more. I wasn't really watching the time. At some point, the trees started to thin out and the path all but disappeared. I stopped, looked around, and realized I couldn't tell where I had come from. There were no signs, no cairns, no markers. Just trees in every direction and the faintest idea of a trail behind me. I stayed calm. I knew the sun was still up, and I hadn't gone that far. I turned around and tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked different now. I walked for 20 minutes and realized I wasn't getting back on any trail. I pulled out my map and tried to make sense of where I was, but it didn't help. I hadn't marked the turnoff, and now the forest felt bigger and quieter than before. I checked my phone. No signal, not even one bar. I put it on airplane mode to save the battery and slid it back in my pocket. At first, I tried to head downhill, figuring it would lead to a stream or road, but the slope was steep and covered in loose dirt. I slipped more than once and finally decided to stop and rethink. I sat on a big rock and ate one of my protein bars, sipping from my water bottle. I was okay. I could still turn this around. I just needed to move carefully and keep track of where I'd been. That was when I noticed the sound. It wasn't anything specific, just the lack of sound. No wind, no birds, not even the rustle of trees. The air had gone still, and I felt a tightness in my chest I hadn't noticed before. I shook it off and kept moving, trying to head north using the position of the sun. But clouds were rolling in now, and it was getting hard to tell direction without a compass, which I stupidly didn't bring. The terrain got harder. Bushes scratched my legs, and sharp rocks slowed me down. I slipped on a patch of loose gravel and scraped my palm. Stung, but I wrapped it with gauze from my kit. I kept pushing forward, but every hour I walked, the forest seemed to close in tighter. The trees got thicker, the ground wetter, like I was moving into a different part of the woods altogether. Around 4 p.m., I found a small clearing and decided to stop. I needed to rest, figure out a plan. I sat on a stump and pulled out my flashlight just to check it. It worked. My hands were shaking a little from cold or nerves. I wasn't sure which. I had maybe half a bottle of water left. I told myself I'd head downhill first thing in the morning if I didn't find a road or river by sundown. Then I heard something. It sounded like someone walking. Just a few steps, then silence. I froze, eyes scanning the trees. I didn't call out. It didn't feel right. I waited, listening hard. Nothing. Maybe an animal. Deer, maybe. But the footsteps had sounded heavy. Too heavy. After 5 more minutes of nothing, I moved on. I didn't want to be in that spot when the sun went down. I walked another hour before I saw it. A structure. It wasn't a house or cabin. It looked more like an old hunting shack, barely standing. The wood was gray and splintered, the roof sagging on one side. It had no windows, just a door hanging halfway off its hinges. I walked around it slowly. No footprints, no tire marks. It looked abandoned but recent. There was a pile of chopped firewood stacked neatly to one side. That meant someone had been here, maybe even lived here. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was dark, but not pitch black. Light filtered through cracks in the walls. Inside was a small table, a rusty stove, and a pile of blankets in the corner. The air smelled like old wood and dust. On the wall was a set of hooks, one of them holding a weathered green jacket. I stood there, just breathing. This place didn't feel right. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. Still, it was shelter. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and ate another bar. I laid the thermal blanket across my legs and waited for darkness. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time I started to drift off, a noise would wake me. Scratching sounds, snapping twigs outside, and once, something that sounded like whispering, even though I knew no one was there. When morning came, I left fast. The forest looked the same as before. I picked a direction and stuck to it, walking until my legs ached. Hours passed. I rationed the last of my water and tried not to panic. I told myself people got lost and were rescued all the time. I just had to keep moving. Late that afternoon, I stumbled onto something that changed everything. It was a pit, a deep one. I didn't see it until I was right on top of it. It looked man-made, square, about 6 feet across, with wooden beams supporting the edges. I peered down and saw the bones. Animal bones, mostly. Deer, maybe some kind of dog. But there were others too. Bigger, longer. A few pieces looked too big to be deer. I felt sick. There were no tools, no signs of hunting. Just a pile of dried bones and a rope ladder leading down, though it was rotted and broken halfway. I backed away and kept moving. My legs felt like rubber, and my throat was dry. I knew I was in trouble now. The shack, the pit, the silence, it all felt wrong. Not supernatural, not monsters, just something human and dangerous. Someone had made that pit. Someone had used it. That meant they were still around or had been not too long ago. The forest got thicker. I was losing daylight again. I was starting to stumble more, stepping on loose rocks and dead branches. My body felt heavy. I wanted to sleep but knew if I laid down, I might not get up. I found a big rock and sat down, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they were closer. I didn't move. I just listened. They circled me. I couldn't see anyone, but they were out there. I stayed still until they faded away. I didn't sleep that night, just sat there, eyes wide open, flashlight in hand. By morning, I was a mess. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. My mind was foggy, but I kept walking. Around noon, I finally heard something familiar, a river, the sound of water rushing over rocks. I followed it, tripping and crawling my way through brush until I saw it. A narrow river, running fast and cold. On the other side was a trail, a real trail, packed dirt, boot prints, even a faded sign nailed to a tree. I don't remember crossing the river. I just remember the cold and the way my feet hit the trail after. I followed it for miles. Hours passed. I kept walking, legs burning, until I saw a parking lot in the distance, a ranger station. I stumbled out of the woods like a ghost, dirty, bruised, bleeding from the knees. A man ran toward me and I dropped to the ground. They said I'd been gone 2 days. They found the shack. They found the pit too. But by the time they went back, it had been burned to the ground. Nothing left but charred wood and ashes. No footprints, no clues. Just the pit, still there, full of bones. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't stray from marked trails. I keep a GPS, a whistle, and more than enough supplies now. And I don't talk about that trip unless someone really pushes me. But it's always there, in the back of my mind. The silence, the shack, and whoever made that pit in the woods. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd been doing it since I was a teenager. I liked the silence. I liked being away from people, cities, traffic, and stress. It was just me, the trail, and my own thoughts. Sometimes I camped, sometimes I just took long day hikes. But I always tried to plan things well. I carried a GPS, paper maps, emergency supplies, and told someone where I was going. I'd never had a real scare before, just a few close calls with dehydration or minor injuries. This time, I was hiking in Utah. I'd been there a few times before, mostly in the more popular areas like Zion and Bryce. But I wanted something quieter. I found a lesser-known area through a hiking forum, somewhere a bit off-grid but still reachable by car. It was near the Escalante area, but not in any marked park territory. A few people had shared GPX routes through unnamed canyons and washes, and it looked amazing. Narrow red rock corridors, dry riverbeds, strange rock formations. I downloaded a couple of routes to my GPS, marked a few waypoints, and planned a 2-day out-and-back hike through one of the longer canyons. I parked my car at a makeshift dirt pullout about an hour and a half from the nearest paved road. There were no signs, just a faint 2-track road that disappeared behind some low cliffs. No one else was there, which I liked. I packed my gear, light sleeping bag, bivy sack, food for 2 days, plenty of water, water filter, first aid kit, satellite beacon, and a few emergency items. I made sure my GPS and maps matched, double-checked my compass, and wrote a quick note in my car about where I was going and when I'd be back. It was early morning. The sun had just started lighting up the tops of the cliffs. The hike started off easy. A wide wash led down into the mouth of a long, winding canyon. I passed dry pools, scattered boulders, and towering sandstone walls. The sky above was deep blue, and the temperature was cool. I made good time. I checked my GPS at each marked waypoint and everything matched. Around midday, I stopped for a quick meal of jerky, trail mix, and an energy bar. I drank a lot of water, knowing the heat would build later. By afternoon, the canyon narrowed. The walls closed in until I could touch both sides at once. Sunlight barely reached the floor, and it got cooler in the shade. It was beautiful and a little eerie. Every now and then I saw a footprint or boot mark, which reassured me I wasn't the only person who had ever been through here. But I hadn't seen anyone all day. I reached a wide bend where the canyon opened a bit. According to my GPS, this was my turnaround point. I planned to sleep here for the night, then head back the same way in the morning. I rolled out my bivy sack in a small sandy patch, ate a freeze-dried meal, and wrote a few lines in my small notebook. The wind howled softly through the narrow corridor. It was quiet, too quiet sometimes. I checked my GPS and satellite beacon again. Everything was good. No messages. Battery was still strong. That night I didn't sleep well. The wind made strange noises against the rock walls. Every now and then, a pebble would fall or a tiny crack would echo strangely. I told myself it was nothing. Still, I kept my headlamp close and my knife tucked into my bag, even though I knew it wouldn't help much out here. I finally dozed off sometime around midnight. The next morning I woke up early. My shoulders ached from sleeping on hard ground. I stretched, ate a small breakfast, packed up everything carefully, and began heading back. The sun had just begun to light the canyon rim again. I followed my footsteps where I could, though wind and dust had already erased many of them. Then, around an hour into my return hike, something happened. I came to a split in the canyon that I didn't remember. There was a smaller offshoot to the left that didn't show up on my GPS. The main canyon bent to the right, but it looked different than I remembered. I thought maybe the lighting had just changed it, or maybe I'd walked a bit off course without realizing it. The rock formations looked unfamiliar. I checked my GPS. The dot was off from the line I had followed yesterday, just slightly but enough to notice. I backtracked a bit, trying to find a familiar rock or dry pool, but it all looked the same now. Red walls, dry gravel floor, scattered brush. I tried to find the exact spot where I'd camped, but couldn't. The GPS kept jumping slightly, probably from the signal bouncing off the tall canyon walls. I turned in circles a few times, trying to line up the map with the terrain. That's when I realized I was no longer sure which direction was back. I sat down and drank water. I told myself to stay calm. I had the GPS, the map, the compass. I just needed to figure it out. But I couldn't. The terrain didn't match the topographic map anymore. The GPS track curved off in one direction, but the canyon bent another way. I thought maybe I'd followed the wrong fork and now I was stuck in a side canyon. I hiked back the way I thought I'd come, but after half an hour, the walls grew steeper and more jagged. There were no footprints anymore. I scrambled up a low ledge to get a better view, but the walls just twisted and wound endlessly in every direction. I turned on my satellite beacon and sent a ping, just in case, but didn't call for rescue yet. I didn't want to overreact. I kept walking. I thought if I could just get up high, I could see where the car was parked. But every time I thought I found a slope that would lead me up, it ended in sheer rock or loose scree. I scraped my hands climbing one section and cut my finger. Not deep, but it stung and bled. By noon, the heat started building. The narrow canyon trapped warm air like an oven. I soaked my hat and shirt in the little water I had left, knowing I'd need to filter more soon. I came across a muddy pool in a shadowed alcove and used my filter to refill 2 bottles. Tasted awful, earthy, like wet leaves, but it was better than nothing. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky and began casting longer shadows. I kept thinking I was close to finding my way out, but every turn looked the same. Red walls, gravel floor, scattered shrubs. My feet began to blister. My calves burned from scrambling over rocks and ducking under ledges. I kept checking the GPS, but it was no help now. The map just showed me bouncing around in the same general area. I still didn't hit the route line I'd marked. I must have veered off far more than I thought. I slept uneasily that night beneath an overhang. I didn't even roll out my bivy sack. I just lay there in my clothes, sweating and shivering in turns. My legs cramped from dehydration and overuse. My food was down to one last freeze-dried meal and 2 bars. I didn't want to hit the emergency call button on my beacon yet. I still thought I could find my way out if I just got high enough. The next morning I set out early and climbed a steep rocky slope that looked like it might lead to the canyon rim. It was brutal. Loose gravel, sharp rocks, no shade. I had to stop every few minutes to catch my breath. When I finally reached the top, the view nearly made me cry. Endless ridges and canyons. No road, no sign of my car, nothing man-made. Just waves of red and orange stone. I had no idea where I was. The GPS still showed my location, but I couldn't match it to anything real. I walked along the rim for nearly an hour before it became too steep and I had to descend again. That afternoon, I made the decision to hit the emergency button. I waited 10 minutes. No sign anyone had received it. I sent it again. Still nothing. I had no idea if the beacon was working in the narrow canyon. I knew it should, but maybe something was interfering. On the fourth day, I ran out of food completely. I rationed water. My legs shook constantly, and my head throbbed. The sun beat down hard during the day, and the nights felt freezing. I started seeing things. Shadows that looked like people, sounds that seemed like footsteps, but I knew it was just my mind breaking down. I kept moving. I kept searching for a way out. On the fifth day, I found a canyon that looked wider, and I thought maybe it would lead to a road. I followed it for hours. My lips were cracked. My skin burned from the sun. I stumbled often. Once I fell and scraped my knee badly. The blood ran down my shin, but I barely felt it anymore. I was numb. Then, in the late afternoon, I heard something. A low rumble. I thought maybe it was in my head again, but it got louder. I followed the sound, weakly at first, then faster. It grew into a deep grumble and echo. I rounded a bend and saw something that almost didn't feel real. A dirt road. Not the same road I came in on, but a road nonetheless. Wide, dusty, with tire tracks. I collapsed on my knees and cried. I crawled to it, then stumbled down it for what felt like forever. Finally, I saw a sign. A rusted metal sign with faded letters, BLM Maintenance Road 482. I walked another half mile before I saw a truck in the distance. Parked. Empty. I thought I was hallucinating, but I reached it. It was real. No one was inside, but there were tools in the back. I waited beside it for hours. Then, just before dark, another truck came down the road. A maintenance worker. He slammed the brakes when he saw me. It was the end of September, and I had taken some time off work to clear my head. I wanted to get away from the noise, the screens, the endless calls and emails. I was mentally drained, physically tired, and just done with everything. So I planned a solo hiking trip into the backcountry. I had done some backpacking before, nothing too extreme, but I knew how to handle myself. I packed light but smart, brought all the essentials, and chose a long but manageable trail in the northern part of the state. It wasn't a national park or anything, just a big stretch of forest, hills, and lakes about 3 hours from the nearest town. The trail was called Broken Ridge Loop. It wasn't very popular, which is exactly why I chose it. About 45 miles of rough trail through thick woods, scattered with old fire roads and unmaintained paths. There were a few designated campsites along the way, but most people didn't venture that deep. I had found the trail on a hiking forum, where a few people mentioned it was beautiful but rough and lonely. That sounded perfect to me. I arrived at the trailhead around noon on a Thursday. There was only one other car parked there. The air was crisp, the leaves were just starting to change, and the forest smelled like pine and damp earth. I shouldered my pack and started walking. The first few miles were smooth, with soft dirt and wide paths. Birds chirped overhead, and squirrels darted across the trail. I felt good, free. By late afternoon, I had covered about 10 miles and found a nice flat spot near a stream to set up my tent. That first night was peaceful. I cooked some rice and beans on my small stove, filtered water from the stream, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. I crawled into my sleeping bag feeling satisfied, and I slept deeply. No bugs, no noise, just the wind through the trees. The next day, I packed up early and kept going. The trail got steeper and rockier. I had to climb over fallen logs and push through thick underbrush in places. My legs ached, but it felt good to move. I passed a small lake just before noon, its surface perfectly still, like glass. I didn't see a single person all day. Not a hiker, not a hunter, not even an animal bigger than a rabbit. That night, I camped in a little clearing up on a ridge. I had a view of the forest stretching out in every direction. Miles and miles of trees. It felt like I was the only person on Earth. But things started to feel off the next day. It was little things at first. I woke up and found my bootlaces untied, even though I always double knot them and tuck them into the tops of the boots. I thought maybe I just forgot. Then, a few miles into my hike, I found a cigarette but on the trail. It looked fresh, maybe a day old. I didn't smoke, and I hadn't seen anyone. There weren't any footprints or trash nearby. It just felt out of place. Then I noticed that I wasn't seeing any wildlife anymore. No birds, no squirrels, no buzzing insects, just silence. Thick, unnatural silence. The kind that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're being watched. I kept walking, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Around midday, I passed an old hunting blind in a tree. It looked abandoned, half collapsed, the wood dark with rot. There were some empty shotgun shells on the ground below it. I kept going, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, somewhere, watching me from the trees. I started checking over my shoulder more often. I stopped using my headphones. I didn't want to miss any sounds. That night, I camped in a low valley near a shallow creek. The trees were dense, and it got dark fast. I ate quickly and climbed into my tent before the sun had fully set. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, eyes wide open, heart pounding, listening. I kept thinking I heard something. Sticks cracking, leaves rustling, a footstep, then nothing, then maybe something again. I stayed awake most of the night. In the morning, I found boot prints near my tent. They weren't mine. They were bigger, wider, and deeper, like whoever made them was heavier or carrying a lot of weight. They circled the tent once, then vanished into the woods. My stomach dropped. I looked around, scanned the trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no sounds, just silence. I told myself it was probably just another hiker. Maybe someone who didn't want to make contact. That happens sometimes. People come out here to be alone. But I knew it wasn't that. Nobody circles a tent and then disappears like that. I packed up fast and pushed hard that day, doing nearly 15 miles. I wanted to get to the far end of the loop, where it met an old forest road. I figured if I felt weird again that night, I'd hike out early along the road. It would take me back to the main highway in about 8 miles. Not a short walk, but easier than going the rest of the loop through rough trail. Late that afternoon, I found something that made me stop cold. A campsite maybe a few weeks old. Torn tent, ashes from a fire pit, empty food wrappers, and a rusted can of beans. But the weird part was the tarp. Someone had tied a blue tarp between 2 trees, and on it were carvings. Deep scratches, almost like they had been made with a knife or something sharp. Just random lines, no words, but it looked aggressive, like someone had done it in a frenzy. The trees around the tarp were scratched too. Not claw marks, more like slashes. Long, angry cuts in the bark. I didn't stay long. I kept moving faster now. I kept glancing over my shoulder, heart pounding. I didn't set up camp that night. I just rolled out my sleeping bag behind a fallen log and didn't light a fire. I ate a protein bar cold and lay there, holding my small knife close to my chest. I barely slept. Sometime in the early morning hours, I heard it again. Not an animal, not wind, footsteps, crunching leaves. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. I held my breath. Whatever it was, it stopped about 20 feet away. Just stood there. I could feel it, like a weight in the dark. Then, slowly, the footsteps backed away and faded. When the sky finally turned gray with morning light, I grabbed my pack and started moving. I didn't eat. I didn't rest. I just walked. My legs were shaking, my eyes heavy, but I didn't stop. I found the forest road around noon and followed it west. It was old and overgrown, but I kept going. Around mid-afternoon, I saw something that made my stomach flip. A pile of stones, neatly stacked, maybe waist-high, sitting right in the middle of the road. And on top of the stones, a rabbit, dead. His head was missing. I turned around and walked the other way. I bushwhacked through the trees for nearly 2 miles until I found the trail again. My GPS wasn't working anymore, and I had no signal. I figured I was about 12 miles from the trailhead if I cut through the last ridge and crossed a dry creek bed. I kept pushing. My shoulders ached from the pack. My knees felt like they were on fire, but I didn't stop. The forest got darker that afternoon. Thick clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up. Trees creaked. Branches snapped above me. I stumbled a few times, caught my boot on roots, scraped my hands on rocks, but I kept going. Just before sunset, I found a narrow deer trail that curved up the side of a hill. It wasn't on my map, but I followed it. It was steep and rough, but I didn't want to go back down into the valley. I figured higher ground would be safer. I followed the trail for about a mile until I found a small rocky shelf with a partial view of the woods below. That's where I saw him, a man, standing on the edge of the trees, far below, just watching. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there half hidden in shadow. I blinked, and he was gone. I didn't sleep that night either. I just sat with my back to a rock wall, knife in hand, watching the trees. At first light, I started moving again. My body screamed with pain, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. The trail twisted and vanished in places, but I kept going west. I saw more signs, broken branches, fresh boot prints, a glove hanging from a branch. I ignored them. Finally, around midday, I heard something new. Engines. I pushed through the trees and stumbled onto a dirt road, a real one, and coming down it, a truck, an old Forest Service vehicle. I waved like a madman, and the truck stopped. 2 guys inside looked at me like I was a ghost. I must have looked like hell. They gave me water and a ride to a ranger station another 20 miles away. I didn't tell them everything, just that I got lost, maybe a little turned around, heard strange noises. They nodded, said it happens. One of them asked if I saw any signs of the guy they'd been trying to track. I asked what guy. They said a man had gone missing 2 weeks ago on the same trail. Experienced hiker. No trace, just gone. I didn't say anything else. I got home the next day, showered 3 times, burned the clothes I wore. I still hike sometimes, but only on short trails. I've always been into hiking, even if I never really considered myself an expert. I wasn't one of those hardcore mountaineers or anything like that, but I liked the peace and challenge of the outdoors. I liked the way the trees looked when sunlight cut through the branches, how your body ached after miles of walking, and the sound of leaves under your boots. It was something that kept me grounded. It was late September when I decided to take a solo hiking trip. I had a few days off work and needed a break from screens and emails. I wanted silence, real silence, the kind you only get deep in the woods where even the birds go quiet sometimes. I picked a trail in Idaho I'd read about online. It wasn't super popular, which I liked. It ran through a national forest, about 20 miles one way with a small loop at the far end and some primitive campsites scattered throughout. The trail was mostly single track, and there were warnings on the website about poor signage in some parts, but I figured I'd be fine. I had a paper map, a compass, extra food, and a power bank for my phone even though I didn't expect service. I wasn't a total amateur. I parked my car at the small dirt lot where the trailhead began. It was one of those empty, cracked lots that looked like no one had used it in weeks. I didn't mind. That meant I'd get the whole trail to myself. I locked the car, threw on my pack, and started hiking just before noon. The first few hours were easy. The forest was thick, mostly pine, and the trail was well-worn and soft underfoot. I made decent progress despite stopping often to take in the views. There was a narrow stream running beside the trail for the first few miles, and the air smelled clean. Cool. I passed 2 old trail markers that were both cracked and partly faded. One of them looked like someone had tried to scratch out the painted arrow and redraw it with a knife. That should have been my first red flag, but I figured some kid had done it out of boredom. Around 4 p.m., I stopped near a clearing to set up camp. I was maybe 8 or 9 miles in. There was a slight slope, but it was dry, and there was a big, flat rock where I could cook. I pitched my tent, filtered some water, made a quick meal, and just sat there for a long time as the sun went down. There were no voices, no hums of cars, no artificial lights, just wind and trees. That night, I slept well. I woke up once or twice to the sounds of rustling, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Deer maybe, small animals, typical forest stuff. I never sleep great in a tent anyway, so I just rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, I ate a protein bar, packed up, and kept going. I figured I'd do the rest of the trail, loop around, then start heading back the next day. That was the plan. But a few hours in, I noticed something weird. The trail started to narrow, and the trees got denser. I checked my map a few times, and it looked right, but I didn't remember reading anything about this section getting so overgrown. Branches were clawing at my arms and legs, and the dirt turned to uneven rock. There was a fork in the trail with no marker at all. One path curved downhill. The other climbed up a small ridge. I paused. My gut told me to go uphill. It just looked more traveled, barely, but enough. The downhill path was muddy, with barely any footprints, so I started climbing. After an hour, the trail disappeared. Not in a sudden drop-off kind of way. It just faded, like it hadn't been used in years. The dirt path turned into forest floor. No footsteps, no broken branches, no clear direction. I stopped, pulled out my map again, and tried to get my bearings. I had my compass, and based on the direction I had been going, I should have been curving west. But the needle didn't match up. I was too far east. I must have taken the wrong fork. I wasn't too worried at first. I had food, water, and shelter. I could just double back and find the right trail. So I turned around. That's when I saw that I had no idea where I'd come from. The brush was so thick behind me that I couldn't even see my last few steps. It was like the trail had swallowed itself. I backtracked for 20 minutes, but everything looked the same. Pine trees, moss, rocks. No trail, no fork, no signs. I started getting nervous. I stopped moving for a while, just stood still, trying to breathe. I thought about staying put. Maybe someone would come along the trail eventually. But I hadn't seen a single person since I got there, and I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going. Just a trail in Idaho. I cursed myself for being so vague. I decided to keep moving. I figured if I kept heading west, I'd either find the original trail or hit a road eventually. I knew the forest wasn't infinite. There were boundaries. People lived around the edges. But the deeper I walked, the more the terrain changed. The ground turned soft and uneven. Roots twisted like ropes above the dirt, and the light started fading even though it was only early afternoon. I fell twice in the span of an hour. The first time I twisted my ankle a little, and the second time I landed hard on my side. My ribs ached when I stood up, but nothing felt broken. I kept walking. By 5 p.m., I still hadn't found anything familiar. The woods around me were silent. No birds, no wind. Even the trees looked strange, taller, thinner, like they'd grown without space. I saw bones near a fallen log. Not human, but big. Maybe a deer, maybe something else. Picked clean and sun-bleached. I set up camp just before sunset. There was a tiny clearing with flat enough ground. I didn't bother with dinner. My appetite was gone. I lay in the tent with my knife under my sleeping bag, just in case. I barely slept. Every crack of a branch outside made me flinch. Once, I heard something large breathing close by, just breathing, but it moved on. It didn't sound like a bear. Too slow, too deliberate. By morning, I felt sick to my stomach. I forced myself to eat some jerky and started walking again. My ankle had stiffened overnight, but I could still move. I kept going west, I thought. I stopped using the compass. It didn't make sense anymore. The needle spun in circles at one point, then locked in the wrong direction. I threw it into the bushes. I tried climbing a hill to get some perspective. Maybe I could see a road or the ridge I'd crossed yesterday. The climb was brutal. Loose rock, thorns, steep dirt. I nearly slipped 3 times and had to use both hands to crawl the last bit. But at the top, I saw nothing but trees. Endless trees. I stayed there for a long time, not thinking, just staring. Later that day, the forest started to feel wrong. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way to describe it. I saw things that didn't make sense. Trees growing in circles, dead animals arranged neatly under rocks, a gutted fox strung between two branches with some kind of string. Human string. I didn't stay to study it. I kept walking. Around late afternoon, I found a trail again. A real trail. Dirt packed down, boot prints. It looked old, but it was something. I nearly cried. I followed it without thinking. It twisted downhill through the trees and dropped into a narrow ravine. The rocks were slippery with moss. At the bottom, the trail crossed a small stream, then climbed back up the other side. I slipped crossing the water, landed on my left hand and cut my palm open on a sharp rock. Blood soaked into my sleeve before I got a bandage on it. My pack was wet. Everything was getting heavier. I followed the trail until dark, then camped again. This time I didn't even set up the tent. I just rolled out the sleeping bag and slept on top of it, too tired to care. The cold kept waking me. I could hear movement nearby, slow, crunching steps. It sounded like someone circling me. In the morning, I found fresh footprints. Not mine, bigger, deeper, going around my sleeping bag. Once, twice, then off into the woods. I didn't stay long after that. That day, the trail started to disappear again. I ran out of marked paths by noon and started seeing more strange things. A rusted axe buried in a stump, a shirt hanging from a tree, torn and sun-bleached. I saw what looked like a small wooden shelter far off the trail, just a few walls standing. I didn't go near it. My food ran out that night. I had one protein bar left and a handful of trail mix. I rationed it. By the 5th day, my body started to feel like it was shutting down. My legs were heavy, and my head pounded. My water filter had broken the day before, so I was boiling water in a metal cup and hoping for the best. My hands were shaking. I thought I might pass out. Then, just as the sun was setting, I saw something in the distance. Power lines. Thin black lines cutting through the tops of trees, stretching across the sky. Civilization. Or at least something close to it. I cried. I actually dropped to my knees and cried. It still took me hours to get there. The forest didn't want to let me go. Every step hurt. Every turn looked the same. But I followed the power lines even when the brush got thick. I scraped my arms, cut my legs, kept walking. Eventually, I found a dirt service road beneath the